Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're taking a deep dive into Mussolini's War by John Gooch. This book really gets into Italy's military experience under Mussolini, starting from when he took power right through to the dramatic collapse of his regime in World War II.
It really is a fascinating journey and often quite tragic, It shows how a leader's big ambitions can just smash head-on into military reality. We'll be looking at a whole series of campaigns. I think the reconquest of Libya, the Abyssinian War.
Right, and then the intervention in Spain.
Exactly. Spain, the invasion of Greece, the fighting in North Africa and Russia, those really brutal occupation duties in the Balkans.
And finally, the actual defense of Italy itself.
Yeah, and what Gooch does so well is peel back the layers of fascist propaganda.
You see the real story behind it.
You do. And the deep struggles within the Italian military, the rivalries, and that really complex relationship with Germany, their ally.
So the big themes that keep coming up are, what, Mussolini's strategy, maybe?
Definitely that. His often, frankly, unrealistic strategic vision. Then there's the constant issue of underpreparation, material shortages.
Always short of something.
Always. And the infighting among the military leaders. And ultimately, you see the devastating human cost. A nation just struggling, really, to live up to these huge imperial dreams its leader had.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Mussolini takes charge in 1922. What's his big idea?
Well, his main goal is to build this new, strong Italy and quite literally carve out a new Roman Empire. He's looking at the Mediterranean, North Africa, even parts of the Balkans.
Italy had colonial ambitions before, though, right?
Oh, sure. That wasn't new. What was new was how Mussolini sort of wove all these different goals together into one big program. It was all driven by this need for spazio vitale.
Living space. That sounds familiar.
It does. And he also wanted to erase past embarrassments, especially that disaster at Caporetto in World War I. He desperately wanted to get rid of that old saying, Italiani sunt imbels.
The Italians can't fight. He wanted to prove that wrong.
Exactly. Prove everyone wrong.
So where does he start trying to prove this? What's the first big military test?
He turns first to colonial conquests, specifically like Abyssinia or Ethiopia in 1935.
Yes.
And this is interesting because his own naval and air chiefs warned him. They said, look, there are hardly any roads. The infrastructure just isn't there. But Mussolini was determined. He wanted to solve the Abyssinian problem with force.
And his objective was pretty blunt.
Very. Quote, the total destruction of the Abyssinian forces. No messing around.
Okay, so how did that go? I seem to remember reading the initial resistance wasn't overwhelming.
It wasn't, not at first. But the advance itself was incredibly difficult. Heavy rains just turned the mule tracks into mud. Movement was painfully slow.
And General Dubono, the commander, he was getting on a bit.
Yeah, he was 69, pretty exhausted, and just couldn't cope with the pace Mussolini wanted. So Marshal Badoglio takes over in November 35. Same objective, though, total destruction. Complete conquest.
Was Badoglio's approach different?
A bit more methodical, maybe. He focused on securing the supply lines first. But Mussolini was constantly pushing him, demanding speed, speed, speed.
Now, Gooch talks about the logistics being a minor miracle. What's the story there? Because it sounds like it was anything but easy.
Well, it was quite an achievement. In a way, you're talking 900 trucks, 6,000 camels, 4,000 mules, hauling enormous amounts of supplies every single day over that terrible terrain. They even managed to move a whole division pretty rapidly at one point.
So a miracle born of necessity.
Sort of. But here's a crucial point Gooch makes. This logistical miracle actually hid Italy's deeper weaknesses. It created this dangerous illusion that they could actually handle a modern war.
Setting them up for failure later.
Precisely. And this overconfidence, this hubris, it showed up in their tactics too. Gooch details the use of chemical weapons. Thousands of gas shells fired in battles like Enderta in early 1936.
So a victory, but a deeply flawed one, built on shaky foundations and morally questionable tactics.
Absolutely. And not everyone was fooled. You mentioned General Bystrocchi earlier. He warned Mussolini, said Italy just wasn't ready for a world war.
And he got sacked for his trouble.
Promptly. Which tells you a lot about Mussolini's tolerance, or lack thereof, for bad news.
What about the Italian public? The propaganda machine must have been working overtime, but what was the real mood?
That's a really important question Gooch explores. While the official line was massive popular support, reports from the big cities told a different story. Apathy, nervousness, even considerable anxiety about a wider war.
So unease underneath the surface.
Definitely. And it got worse after the war ended. Soldiers came back talking about how the fighting was still going on, how the new empire felt more like a delusion, a huge burden, a real gap between the propaganda and reality.
Okay, so Abyssinia breeds this dangerous overconfidence. Then comes the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 39, a very different kind of conflict. How did Italy fare there?
Right? It was a different kind of proving ground. Italy started with air support for Franco, but then sent in ground troops, the Corpo Troop Voluntari,
The CTV.
the Volunteer Corps, although maybe not entirely voluntary.
Yeah, quite. In February 37, they attacked Malaga. About 10,000 Italians, backed by Italian and German planes, against maybe 20,000 to 40,000 defenders who were pretty poorly armed. The Italians had total air superiority.
And Italy was also helping Franco secretly.
Oh, yes. Sinking Republican supply ships, even while signing non-intervention agreements. Classic double game.
What about actual battles? Santander was seen as a success.
It was, for the CTV. General Bastico praised his troops, but also warned that their enthusiasm might not last without experienced officers leading them. And interestingly, Franco later had Bastico removed because he felt the Italians were interfering too much, especially over captured Republicans. Shows tension even among allies.
And the Catalonia offensive in late 38, that sounds like it was decisive. It really was. The Italians brought overwhelming artillery power. Gooch quotes someone saying it was almost 500 guns deployed, one gun every 8 meters or so, almost like it was in the Great War. That firepower definitely helped break through and led to the fall of Barcelona.
But what was the cost of this Spanish adventure for Italy?
Huge, over 6 billion lire directly. Plus, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of guns sent to Franco. It undeniably weakened the Italian army right before WWII really kicked off.
So were there lessons learned or just more confirmation bias?
Well, Italian observers tended to see it as a war sui generis, kind of halfway between colonial fighting and a proper European war. Not a real test against industrialized powers. But some drew rather chilling conclusions. General Bricolò, the Air Force chief, and Count Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law and foreign minister.
Yes.
They apparently saw the bombing of Barcelona as a good lesson for the future regarding terror bombing. Ciano actually remarked that it proved air raid shelters were useless and evacuation was the only answer.
Grim lessons indeed. So putting this all together, Abyssinia, Spain, as Europe is sliding towards World War II, what's the actual state of Italy's military? Because Mussolini was making big claims.
Wildly optimistic claims. General Periani was boasting about having 38 divisions ready by late 1939. But Marshal Badoglio, the chief of staff, his report painted a very different picture.
Which was?
Grim. Out of 72 nominal divisions, only 10 were actually fully manned and equipped. Their artillery was all left over from World War I. They had virtually no modern medium tanks and maybe enough fuel for 4.5 months of war.
Wow, that's not ready.
Not even close. The Navy wasn't in much better shape either.
So despite Mussolini personally wanting to jump in alongside Germany, Italy declared non-belligerence in September 1939. How did that go down?
Domestically. Massive popular approval. People were relieved. Mussolini, though, he hated it. He saw it as necessary but was, quote, not at all happy. He kept circling back to the possibility of our action.
A disconnect between the leader and the led.
Absolutely. But then, as Germany just rolled over France in June 1940, the mood shifted a bit in Italy. There was this expectation the war would be short, sacrifices limited, and maybe Italy needed to join in quickly to, get something out of it.
Fear of missing out on a geopolitical scale.
Pretty much. Mussolini feared Italy would become a second-order nation if they sat it out. So he rushed into an offensive against France on the Western Front.
Even though Badoglio warned against it, about the terrain and how poorly deployed the Italian troops were.
Yep, warnings dismissed. And Italian strategy just fell apart. Contradictory orders, the French put up more of a fight than expected. It was chaos right from the start.
And what about North Africa? Marshal Graziani was in command there, right?
He was. And he was basically immobile for months. He kept overestimating British strength. Based on reports from SIM, the military intelligence, he was constantly demanding more guns, more tanks, more trucks. Offered his resignation several times, maybe partly theatrically, maybe not.
Meanwhile, Mussolini had his sights set on Greece.
Yes, he had this personal grudge against Greece, going back to 1923. He wanted a surprise attack, completely underestimating the Greek army and ignoring the fact that Germany really didn't want trouble in the Balkans just then.
So problems on land, what about at sea? Malta was a big issue, wasn't it?
A huge issue, a real thorn in the Italian side, as Gooch puts it. And the vulnerability of the Italian Navy was brutally exposed by the British carrier raid on Taranto in November 1940.
That was the one with the swordfish biplanes?
That's the one. crippled several Italian battleships, led to Admiral Cavagnari getting sacked.
Yeah.
And it really raised serious questions about air-naval coordination. Procolo, the air chief, basically blamed the Navy for asking vaguely for air support and not using their own seaplanes effectively. It pointed to deeper systemic failures.
Okay, so things are going badly. General Cavallero takes over as chief of staff in December 1940. He wants closer ties with Germany.
He did. But Germany was already laser-focused on Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, so Italy wasn't going to get much help.
And this became painfully obvious pretty quickly.
Very quickly. The fall of Bardia in January 41 was devastating. The 10th Army lost 45,000 men, most of its equipment, trying to defend a huge perimeter with hardly any anti-tank guns against massive British air and sea bombardment.
And Tobruk followed soon after.
Yes. Another 22,000 men captured, hundreds of guns lost, just exposed Italy's weakness completely. Graziani finally resigned for good after that, a total disaster in North Africa.
And yet, despite these disasters, Mussolini decides to send troops to Russia in June 1941. Why?
Ideology, mainly. The fight against communism was a huge driver for him, even though Italian intelligence actually had a pretty good idea of Soviet industrial capacity, estimating they could produce thousands of aircraft, tanks, and trucks each month.
But he sent troops anyway.
He did.
Yeah.
Severely underarmed troops with already strained logistics. The Catholic Church even framed it as a crusade, adding to the ideological fervor.
And the reality on the Eastern Front was brutal.
Incredibly brutal. Gooch highlights the winter of '42, during the Soviet counteroffensive, Operation Uranus. The Italian Second Corps faced something like 90 Red Army rifle battalions, over 750 tanks, thousands of guns.
But against what? What did the Italians have?
Maybe 47 tanks, about 130 guns. The disparity was just staggering.
Unbelievable. The retreat must have been horrific.
It was a rout. Men throwing away weapons, reports of drinking antifreeze out of desperation, dealing with German arrogance on top of everything else.
Any bright spots, any units that held together?
The Alpini mountain troops, especially the Tridentina division, showed remarkable cohesion, Gooch notes. But the overall cost was immense, 70,000 Italians taken prisoner.
And the survival rates were terrible.
Appalling. Maybe 22,000 died just on the march to the camps, and another 38,000 died in the POW camps themselves. A catastrophic loss driven by ideology.
While all this is happening in Russia, Italy is also occupying parts of the Balkans, Yugoslavia, Greece. What was that like?
Brutal counterinsurgency warfare. In Croatia, Italian soldiers witnessed what they called the medieval barbarities of the Ustasha militia, the Croatian fascists. General Ambrosio noted that power fell into the hands of unprepared men, blinded by a desire for revenge.
So Italian policy hardened.
Definitely. In Montenegro, they went from trying to win people over to just burning villages and executing partisans. General Rowata introduced this doctrine of a head for a tooth, ruthless reprisals. Some Italian soldiers even started admiring the German efficiency in shooting hostages. Grim stuff.
But there's a complexity there regarding the treatment of Jews, isn't there? Gooch touches on this.
Yes, it's an important point. While Italy had its own anti-Semitic laws, Mussolini, at least initially, resisted German pressure to hand over Jews from occupied Croatia. He agreed to intern them under Italian control instead.
Or later.
Later, Gooch notes, Mussolini secretly told General Robati in occupied France to basically invent all the excuses necessary but not consign a single Jew to the Germans.
So a strange contradiction within the Axis alliance.
It highlights that Italian fascism and German Nazism weren't identical, especially on racial policy, even when they were allies. Moments of defiance, even if inconsistent.
What about Greece? The occupation there had devastating consequences too, right?
Catastrophic. A famine, largely caused by the occupation disrupting food imports and Germany blocking wheat supplies from Macedonia. Perhaps 250,000 people died between 41 and 43.
And the Italians earned a rather unflattering nickname.
Yeah, Allied propaganda called them the Corpo Erotico di Occupazione, the Erotic Occupation Corps. A pretty dismissive and cynical label, given this starvation and brutality.
When the Italian armistice came in 43, what happened to the troops in the Balkans?
Chaos. They were left completely unwarned. Some fought the Germans, many just deserted, and huge amounts of weapons ended up in the hands of partisans. A total breakdown.
So the tide is turning. El Alamein, the Allied landings in North Africa, Operation Tor Orch. Italy's Mediterranean empire is crumbling.
It really is. General Ambrosio, now chief of staff, saw the writing on the wall. He tried to streamline the command, pull divisions back to defend Italy itself.
But the Tunisian campaign was still a struggle.
A huge struggle. General Mess was dealing with vastly inferior equipment. He famously quipped about Italian tanks, something like, "If our tanks were any good, we would already have won the war."
Nose it up, really.
It does. The fall of Tunisia in May 43 was the end of the Axis in North Africa. And at the same time, Allied bombers were hammering Italian cities and what was left of the Navy.
And the defense of Sicily itself.
Another disaster. Inadequate defenses, lack of modern weapons, terrible morale. One officer just called it an absolute fiasco. Everything was falling apart.
Which brings us to that famous meeting at Feltre in July 1943.
Right. Mussolini meets Hitler. Mussolini is silent, dejected, just listening to Hitler rant for 2 hours, getting blamed for everything but securing no promises of real German help.
And Ambrosio warned him directly.
Bluntly. During a break, he told Mussolini Italy was facing imminent military collapse, which could trigger an institutional and social crisis.
And just days later.
Days later, after Rome itself was bombed, the king finally acted and removed Mussolini from power.
Hitler's reaction.
Furious, he saw it as pure betrayal. Immediately launched Operation Alaric to seize control of northern and central Italy.
And the armistice itself, signed in September 43.
Done in secret, Italian troops abroad had no idea. Eisenhower basically forced Italy's hand by threatening to announce the negotiations publicly.
Leading to more chaos.
Complete chaos. The Germans moved swiftly to disarm Italian troops in Italy. There was fighting around Rome itself. The king and Badoglio fled, leaving the government and the army in total disarray.
So, wrapping this all up, Gooch's Mussolini's War presents what kind of picture?
It's fundamentally a tragic story. A nation dragged into a war it just wasn't ready for militarily, industrially, by a leader who relied on intuition, which mostly led to disaster.
A leader unable to set clear goals.
Exactly. No clear, consistent war aims. Add to that the deep rivalries within the military and this sort of half-hearted mobilization effort. Italy's role as a subaltern, a junior partner in the war, was almost baked in from the start.
So, despite individual acts of bravery.
Despite those, the book makes it crystal clear. The structural weaknesses, the lack of equipment, and crucially, a leadership that Gooch says was often well-informed but seemingly none the wiser. All of that sealed Italy's fate.
It really makes you think, reading this deep dive into Mussolini's war. How much does a leader's personality, their vision, actually shape a nation's destiny compared to the hard facts of its economy and military strength?
Yeah, and what happens when those grand illusions consistently trump the grim reality on the ground? It's a sobering question.